Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Crumpin' Wargaming. I am your host, Jonathan Arkin. I am the Chief Crumper. Today, hopefully, is the day that I have earned your subscription because I am loving bringing you these tactical videos, helping to improve everyone's playing, whether you're a casual or competitive player, in the amazing universe of Warhammer 40,000. So today we're going to be talking about terrain and all of the weird kind of funky interactions terrain will have across the various types of terrain systems. So it can be a little bit confusing because you're going to have a bunch of different types of terrain layouts. And that's what we're really going to be getting into today, because how you handle terrain is oftentimes the difference between the person who is going to be winning events and the person who's going to be doing 4-1 or 3-2 at the events. So there are going to be a couple main different standardized types of layouts. So we're going to have the UKTC, and this is the layout that is typically going to be used in the UK. Then we're going to have the WTC, and this is very common all throughout Europe and a little bit in Australia as well. And basically anyone who plays teams, WTC is pretty much the standard. Then you have GW Open Terrain. This is going to be done in primarily America and Games Workshop sponsored events. And then there's Player Placed. Player Placed is a unique type of terrain system where each player will take turns placing a piece of terrain to build their own terrain. And it adds a different level of complexity to the game, which I'm kind of unsure whether I like or not. I just really haven't made my mind up on that yet one. But anyway, here's just kind of what the layouts typically look like. So for GW, you're going to have like your 4 big ruins or big like buildings in the middle of the table. Then you're going to have one wood, and maybe a small building on the sides. It's very open. It's typically very friendly to shooting armies. But it can also be, depending on whether the walls are solid or there's windows in them, it can be very friendly to melee armies as well. It does lead to fairly swingy events. Then in the middle is just an example of what happens with player place terrain. So you get some crates, you get a spattering of woods, you get a spattering of buildings, and the players will just take turns, placing it, and that's that. Then for WTC, as you can see on that layout, your WTC and your UKTC to a large extent are actually fairly similar. They're going to be more dense than most battlefields. WTC is denser than UKTC typically, and I think, in my opinion, it's by far the most fair system for terrain because yes, there will still be 1, 2, or even 3 huge lanes of fire for shooting armies to go through, but there's also going to be the ability for melee armies to be able to move up the board without having to expose themselves too much. So I think it's the most fair and most balanced layouts, and that's what I prefer to play upon. So when we're looking at terrain, we're going to have 4 main categories of the style of terrain. So you have hills, and hills are what they are. They're hills, and they'll have the keyword for hill on them. And so these are just part of the battlefield. Normal visibility rules apply to them. You'll have area terrain. Area terrain is actually the vast majority of terrain on the battlefield. This is going to be your woods, your forest, your ruins, your craters, your vents, all these things. And they're all going to have special abilities based off of what keywords they have. Then you're going to have obstacles. Obstacles will be your crates and your barricades, and maybe a few others as well. And they have just kind of special rules for being obstacles. And then you're going to have the category of buildings specifically. Now, this is not to be confused with ruins. Buildings are actually fortifications. So these are things that you can actually strike, that you can attack, that have a defensive profile. So that's what those are. Now, it's really important to remember that all of your terrain is based off of keywords in Warhammer 40,000, just like basically everything else. Regardless of what the terrain looks like, regardless of what you think it is, the keyword is what matters as to how it actually affects the game that you're playing. So make sure you always check the keywords of your terrain. And in just a few moments, we're going to go through all of the keywords of the terrain. So we're going to get a really strong understanding of that. So what are normal visibility rules? Normal visibility rules in Warhammer 40k is true line of sight. And this can be a little bit problematic at times. This is simply because when you're using true line of sight, you have to get down at the level of your model and see if you can see the enemy model from your model's perspective, which is obviously subjective and not objective. So in order to make this a little more accurate and decrease some arguments, I have 2 big tools that I use. One, I play on Tabletop Simulator a lot. I do play in person. I love that as well, but I do play on the computer quite a bit. And it makes measuring true line of sight much easier because you can just draw straight lines. And can you actually see it, or do you just think you can see it? And then also for everyone who's playing in live events, I always carry a laser with me. A laser is going to cost you $8. It's going to be the best freaking purchase you've ever made for your wargaming. Okay. All you do is when you're arguing whether you can draw a line of sight from one of your models to an enemy model, you just point the laser down, and if that laser crosses between your model and the enemy model without crossing through line of sight blocking terrain, you're good. You can see them. There's not going to be any argument about whether or not you think, oh, I can kind of make this out. And it's just going to be a lot easier on you. Please get laser. The one I use is actually the one from Army Painter. It's just what I use. I'm not affiliated with them. No, I don't get paid by them, although I would love to one day. But that's just the one I use. The battery never dies, and it works super, super well. So I'm just going to switch to a tabletop simulator view here real fast, and I'm going to demonstrate to you exactly how this line of sight really kind of works. So here we go. Now we are on our TTS view. So if I'm looking at right here, I have some storm. I've got a couple different scenarios here, and we're going to go over these later in the video. But for right now, we're just going to focus on these storm boys and these Virtus Praetors. Okay, so these custodian Praetors, they're all the way over here. And if you look at it, it might appear to you at first glance that they cannot see, and so that means they can't shoot the storm boys. However, true line of sight is drawn from the model, which means these Virtus Praetors can draw a line of sight from their spears. So in this situation, this spear can easily see the Storm Boys and it can shoot them, even if you could not draw a direct line from the base. The base is irrelevant. It is the spear that you draw a line of sights from. So yep, they can shoot the Storm Boys, and even so can this guy, because you can draw a straight line directly to the Storm Boys without crossing over the terrain. For our purposes here, and for almost every tournament, these little lips do not count as part of the terrain. So if you see this little lip right here, they don't count. The only thing that's going to count is actually the physical wall. So if it crossed the wall like this, no, you can't see through it. But it doesn't. These spears are going to go straight through, so these Storm Boys are not safe, even though you might have thought they were. So you're not safe. All right. And that is just line of sight. And I'm going to talk about the rest of it at another time later in the presentation. So just bear with me, stay with me here, and we'll get back to our main presentation. All right, so let's start talking about the keywords for all of our training. So we're going to have a few keywords, and these are going to apply. And these will change based off of the tournament pack that you're playing in. So always, always, always read your tournament pack before you make your army list, because the tournament pack will give you a lot of clues. Read the terrain, what the keywords are, because the keywords can change from tournament to tournament. So light cover is going to be +1 save against range attacks. If you get light cover, you get +1 to your range attack saves. Heavy cover, which is not seen very often in competitive play, weirdly enough, it's +1 to your save against melee attacks. You'll get +1 if you're benefiting from it. Dense cover refers to getting -1 to hit for the firing unit. This is typically on forest and vents, and sometimes industrial structures, if you see that word as well. So basically what happens if you're shooting through a obstacle that has dense, you're going to have to subtract -1 from your hit rolls to try to hit your enemy. Okay, then we have obscuring. Obscuring is a keyword that is primarily done on ruins and the such. And what that means is that you can essentially imagine in your head that if it's obscured, it doesn't matter if you can draw true line of sight to the enemy. You still can't see them if they're behind obscuring terrain. It might sound a little confusing right now. It's really not, and I will demonstrate that to you on the tabletop, the simulator view here in just a few moments. And then we're going to talk about difficult terrain. Difficult terrain is going to provide a -2 to the movements of your units if you're touching the terrain in your movement phase at any point in your movement phase, or if you're touching it at any point during your charge phase. So if you're a unit of Terminators and you only move 5 inches, but you're in difficult terrain, you're only moving 3 inches. And then if you're still in that terrain when you're trying to charge out, you'll be -2 to your charge as well. So it's really important to know how to interact with difficult terrain, especially if you're already a slow-moving model. Now, it is important to note that for difficult terrain, flyers get to ignore it. They take no penalties from difficult terrain. Titanic units also will ignore it if the difficult terrain is 3 inches or less in height, which means like craters that are applying difficult terrain won't apply to Titanic, but maybe forest would. And then we'll go over the last few keywords real fast. Scalable is a word that you'll see on building, or ruins, not building, sorry, I should use proper language, on ruins, or a lot of times on like industrial crates. And what this means is that you can go up and over the obstacle, but you do have to spend movement to actually go up and over. So it might cost you 4 inches just to get on top of the crate, and then it might cost you 1 inch to go across it, and then 4 inches to go down it, which can be kind of hard to do. And only infantry, beasts, and swarms can go through floors of a building. Flyers can land on top of the building. And if a flyer is on the ground and it moves all the way to the top, it's not going to suffer really much movement because they don't have to pay for vertical movement. They only pay for horizontal movement. But that's just the way that goes. So then we have unstable. And unstable means that you cannot end your movement on top of the terrain. So sometimes this can be an industrial crate, it can be rubble, whatever. You can move over the terrain, you just can't end your movement on top of the terrain. Then we'll have a defense line, which is once again seen very rarely in competitive, but you'll see it in casual quite a bit. And when you have a defensive line, models can fight within 2 inches instead of the normal 1-inch engagement range. Then breachable, which might be the most important keyword in the entire game for terrain. Breachable means that your infantry, your swarms, and beast can move directly through the terrain piece. And typically this is going to be a ruin. And this is why infantry, even though they're slower, a lot of times they're actually faster than even cavalry units are because they can just move straight through buildings, which is really, really strong. Now, I realized I may have gone a little too fast. Flyers here, because I didn't speak about how flyers interact with ruins. I'm really going to demonstrate that more in the TTS view, but let me just mention it here. Flyers, similar to infantry, they can fly over ruins. But they can't charge through them, even though infantry can charge them. And that might have confused you a little bit, but I promise you I'm going to go into a lot of detail with the TTS view, so you guys will 100% understand that in just a moment. Then we have defensible. Defensible is going to be ruins and forest and the like. And when you're in defensible terrain, if you're charged, you can declare to either set to defend or hold the line. If you declare to set to defend, you will be +1 to hit in melee. So your opponent will charge you, they'll hit you. Anything that survives on your side will then be +1 to hit in melee. Or hold the line. And holding the line allows you to spend your 1 CP for Overwatch and then do an Overwatch on a 5-up instead of a 6-up, which effectively doubles the effect of your Overwatch, which is really dang powerful. Now, the important part of defensible, it does say that every unit must be within the defensible terrain. So you can't just have like 2 models in the defensible and 3 other and then declare you're holding the line and overwatching at 5-ups. You have to have everything within the defensible, which can be hard to set up, but it can be very valuable when you do. And then you have inspiring, which once again, you'll very rarely see in competitive, but you may see it in casual quite a bit. And if you have a unit that is wholly within 6 inches of the inspiring terrain trait, they'll be +1 leadership. Okay, so terrain essentially just falls into 3 categories, guys. It's going to be line of sight modifiers. So this is going to be your obscuring terrain and terrain that just blocks natural line of sight. And then you're going to have modifiers. So modifiers will be light cover, dense cover, defensible, inspiring, heavy, anything that modifies the attack, defense, movement profile of your units. And then lastly, we'll have movement modifiers. So movement modifiers are going to be things that will be breachable, so ruins, difficult, which will be like forest or craters, and then scalable, which will be more of your ruins and your industrial crates. All right, so I have a couple words I want to say before we get into digging into each of the individual pieces of terrain. So who can benefit from cover? This is extremely critically important, and a lot of people don't understand this, so take notes. Not everyone benefits from cover. Typically speaking, only infantry, swarms, and beast are going to benefit from light cover, 1. So swarms, infantry, and beasts will benefit from light cover. No one else can get light cover. Vehicles can't get light cover. Bikers cannot get light cover, for example. Then, if you're a flyer or you have 18 wounds or more, you can never benefit from cover. Never benefit from cover, which means sometimes you'll have really large models that are excellent, have excellent rules that can't be played. There's a reason why in competitive tournaments you basically never see Magnus the Red, even though he's objectively awesome. He deals insane damage in the psychic phase, he deals insane damage in the melee phase, and he provides really good buffs to the units around him. However, his wings are so big, you can't hide him, and since he's 18 wounds or more, he can't benefit from obscuring. So if you go second against, say, Tau or Guard, they're going to kill him turn 1, and you just lost 400 points for basically no freaking reason. So this really can be catastrophic to your game plan. So infantry, beasts, and swarms, we already spoke about them a little bit, how they can get light cover. It's a little different when it comes to obstacles versus area terrain, okay? For obstacles, which are typically going to be industrial crates like we have demonstrated here, You're going to get light cover if you are within 3 inches of the obstacle. And this is very important, and that light cover only applies if your opponent cannot draw a straight line to every line of your base without crossing the terrain. That sounded really complicated. I'm going to make it crazy simple in about 30 seconds. And then lastly, your infantry swarms of beasts, they'll gain light cover when they're inside ruins or count as touching the ruin. And this rule can change from tournament to tournament as well. Most tournaments don't let you get light cover from touching the outside of a ruin. You have to be touching the inside of said ruin. And I'm going to demonstrate that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to our TTS view right now. Boom. Here we are. And we're back into it, okay? All right. So first things first, let's go over this this container or the obstacle terrain here. So this Caladius Grav Tank has a lot of anti-infantry shooting, and he's getting ready to kill these knobs. The knobs were smart, however, or the orc player was smart, and he put them within 3 inches of this obstacle so that they get light cover. Well, the problem is, yes, he did put them within 3 inches of the obstacle to get light cover, but this Caladius Gravity Tank can draw line of sight to every part of this unit's base without having to cross the terrain. Which means, sadly, this guy doesn't get light cover because of the special rule of the way obstacles work with providing light cover. However, if you look at this commando, he actually will benefit from light cover because you cannot draw a line to every part of the base. Because if you go to right here, it's actually blocked by the terrain itself, as you can see on the bird's eye view. So this guy will get light cover where these people will not. All right. Actually, while we're right here, I will go ahead and demonstrate how we do dense terrain as well. So this gravity tank, let's say he's standing right here. He wants to shoot these commandos, and he can easily draw a line of sight. The problem is he's shooting through an industrial vent, and if you look at this industrial vent, it has light cover and dense cover, which means this Caladius, which would normally hit on 2s targeting these guys, he's actually going to be hitting on 3s because he's shooting through this dense cover. Okay? I'll go into this a little bit more in depth once we go through the way that our industrial vents work, but for right now, that's the way it works. If, however, he was touching it, he would not suffer the negative for shooting. So I'll go over that again in just a little bit when we go over the terrains. But for right now, we're talking about light cover to our commandos, which they would not be receiving in this case because I can draw a line of sight to every part of the model except for right here. Okay, cool. Now, let's talk about our ruins. Right now, our Sagittarum, as we see here, are looking to go ahead and shoot and kill all of these knobs. Hopefully, it is the the Custody player's turn and not the Orcs player's turn right here. So, as you see, they are actually physically touching the ruin. And when you look at the terrain on your battlefield, you're basically always going to have some form of way of determining whether you're actually inside the ruin or not. If you have a footprint or like an actual placement of the ruin, touching that is what gives you light cover. Some tournaments will use what's called a rubber band rule, which means they'll draw like a line from corner to corner, and if you're within that line, you'll get benefit. But that'll change from tournament to tournament. So once again, always read your tournament packs to see how you actually use your terrain. So in this case, since the Sagittarum are touching the ruin, they will get light cover because they're touching it, and the ruin has the keyword for light cover. It's also defensible, which means if these knobs were to charge these Sagittarum, they will get to Overwatch on a 5-up instead of on a 6-up. Also super important to know. And this is also obscuring, which means if the Sagittarum were not touching the ruin, they cannot see the knobs because they can't draw a line to the knobs at all without crossing through the obscuring terrain. So right now the knobs are effectively invisible to the Sagittarum. However, now the Sagittarum can see the knobs. Now it is important that this line of sight is always done on a model to model basis. So if we only have 2 Sagittarum touching the terrain, only 2 Sagittarum can shoot the knobs here. Does that make sense? I think it does, and I think you got it. Now, this is why a lot of times, in order to protect ourselves from Overwatch, we always try to charge from behind terrain. So right now, if the knobs were about to charge the Sagittarum, it's a 6-inch charge, and the Sagittarum cannot Overwatch because they can't see them. But if I'm touching, they can. The problem with touching is now the Sagittorium can also be seen. So if I had some nasty shooting back here, I could also shoot them. So that's the way ruin interactions work. All right, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint view now so we can continue with our lecture. And here we go. Okay, where are we? Okay, so we talked about the way infantry, beasts, and swarms will be getting light cover and obstacles within 3 inches, and how you get light cover from being inside of your obstacle. Let's talk about forest. Forest will come in all shapes and sizes. It does not matter the size or the shape or anything like that. They don't block line of sight. They're typically only going to be defensible, difficult, and dense. And remember, defensible means that you can overwatch in 5-ups, or you can get +1 to hit in melee. Difficult means that you're going to suffer -2 to your movement and -2 to charges, unless you're a flyer or you're a Titanic unit and you're able to go over it because it's less than 3 inches in height. And then dense means that if you have to draw a line through the dense at all with your shooting, or if the opposing enemy is in the cover, then you're going to be at -1 to hit them. That's the forest. Craters and vents. Craters and vents are all over the place. Vents are much more likely to see vents in WTC or in UKTC, but you'll see them. Craters are going to give you difficult ground, which is the -2 to movement, and light cover, which is +1 to your armor save against ranged attacks. Remember, heavy is for melee, light is for ranged. Then we have the industrial vent, which is going to be both light cover and dense cover. So you're going to get +1 to your armor save, and you'll be -1 to hit if enemies are shooting you and you're touching it. Now remember, if your enemy is also in the same vent, they will not suffer the -1 to hit you, but that rarely happens. Okay. So actually, we're going to talk about ruins first, and then we'll go back to TTS view and go through all of those. All right, ruins, which we just spoke about a little bit, they're typically going to be defensible. Overwatch on 5-ups, +1 to hit melee. Breachable, so your infantry can move right through them, but not cavalry or anything like that. Light cover, so if you're touching the base of it, then you're going to get +1 to your armor save if your infantry, swarms, or beasts. And then obscuring, so if you're not touching it, you can't see through it. And there's different rulings from tournament to tournament based off of whether or not you can see through a ruin if you're touching the outside of it. And that's very controversial. So always read your tournament pack to see if you can see through it by touching the outside, because that will definitely be a really strong strength to our shooting armies. But basically, everyone always rules that if you're touching from the inside, you can see out and can be seen. So let's go back to the TTS view here, and I'm going to go through a couple of those. All right, so on this map up, I don't have any forest to talk about, but the forest is pretty dang simple. So the way forest works, let's pretend this industrial vent here is a forest. If my commandos are sitting in the forest here, so we're just going to place them right this, but the knob is not. Right now, the tank can draw a line of sight to the unit without crossing the terrain, which means he can shoot all of his shots at this knob, which will affect the entire unit, and he does not suffer -1 to penalty to shoot them. However, if this knob was also touching the terrain, which now they're all touching the terrain, even if it's just barely, you can't draw a line of sight without crossing the terrain to hit every part of the base, which means the tank will be at -1 to shoot them. Okay? Pretty simple, right? Then, if the gravity tank was touching the terrain like this, and that's all you just need to barely touch it. Now, boom, 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 he does not suffer -1 to hit. But the commandos will still get light cover. You negate the dense negatives, but you don't negate the light cover. So the commandos will still be getting light cover here. So that's the way that works. It is very strong and very powerful to be able to just have a vehicle touch terrain. So in this situation, my Caladius gravity tank is shooting this battle wagon. No problem, it's in range and it can see. But even though it's right here, it still has to suffer a -1 penalty to hitting the battle wagon, because the battle wagon is touching the dense cover as well. He's not touching this one, so he's not suffering a penalty for this one, but he is suffering a penalty for this one. Okay? That is the way it works because of the terrain traits, light cover and dense cover. All right. Now, if we were to say, for example, let's just pretend that this industrial vent here was actually a forest, and it had difficult cover, and it had difficult as one of the keywords. It doesn't, but let's pretend it does. And my commandos wanted to charge my Caladius gravity tank. Right now, it shows us that it would be an 8-inch charge. However, since this was difficult in this theoretical charge scenario, instead of being an 8-inch charge, 8.5, it would actually be a 10.5-inch charge. Or 10.5-inch charge. Because it's -2 for moving through here. If they were all like this, and only one of them was touching the hypothetical difficult terrain, right now it looks like it's only a 3-inch charge, but since one of the models is touching it, it's actually going to be +2, which is a 5-inch charge. Okay, so that's the way it works with forest. Cool, you got it. You got forest, and we have industrial vents. Ruins. Let's say we have our biker unit, and he's right here, and he wants to charge our knobs, and it looks like it's a 9-inch charge. Well, the problem is it's not a 9-inch charge, because this is breachable, right? The ruin is breachable, but breachable only applies to infantry, swarms, beast, and the biker is actually cavalry, or a biker, so he's not going to be able to charge through this. This can be a little confusing, because yes, if it was the movement phase and the flyer wanted to fly over the building, that's no problem. He could easily do that. But in the charge phase, you can't charge over the building. Logically, it doesn't make any sense, but GW did it to keep the game relatively fair and balanced. And I understand why they did it. It's a little counterintuitive, okay? So if my biker wanted to charge these knobs, let's put them out to 9 inches again. If he wants to charge these knobs, what he's going to have to do is he's actually going to have to go 8 inches here, and then he's going to have to come here. So it might not even be possible. I don't even think it's a possible charge. So a 9-inch charge actually becomes impossible because he would have to go 13 inches to get to the knobs from this position. I know that can be frustrating. It just is what it is, people. However, the knobs can easily move through here and charge the bike on a 9-inch charge. That's no problem. So infantry do have some benefits, but so do our flyers. So if these guys were trying to charge through difficult, they would be at -2 to charge. The bikers, however, would not, because flyers, since these are flyers, or custodian bikers are flyers, if that was confusing for everyone, they would ignore the difficult terrain. Now let's do one last thing, and I want to talk about true line of sight here. True line of sight can be very, very tricky. So if we look at my kill rig here, it's my favorite model. This guy is awesome, and he is behind these craters. The problem with true line of sight is that, unfortunately, he's very, very tall. He is very, very tall. So if you see here, I'm going to move to a middle line. He's actually higher than these two crates are. These crates are obstacles. They're light cover, scalable, and an exposed position, but they're not obscuring, which means that if you draw a line of sight from these bikes over here, they can absolutely see him, which means even though he's behind those containers and you can only see a sliver, they can shoot him. You might think it's silly, that's fine, but that is the rules of the game, so he can be shot. Now, same situation, just a different keyword. So we have another kill rig right here, and he's behind this ruin, and this ruin is obscuring. We have a unit of bikes here that want to shoot him. Well, they can draw true line of sight, no problem, because you can see his little tower right here, and they're shooting at him. The problem is they actually can't see him because you have the obscuring keyword on this ruin. So regardless of the fact that they can draw true line of sight, since it's obscuring, they can't see him. Now, if, however, our orc player was silly and decided to do something dumb like touch the terrain here, now suddenly obscuring no longer applies and the bikes can shoot him. Okay? That's basically it, the way the terrain works, guys. Sometimes we really love terrain and sometimes we hate it, but you have to be able to play around it. Flyers really love and hate these ruins because since my flyers move really fast, they can start right here and they can move their 18 inches or their 14 inches over that building. Now, if they wanted to charge the kill rig, since the kill rig is behind this terrain, they actually can't charge him. They can't charge him like this, so it's not a 3-inch charge. They would actually have to charge him like this. Do a 5-inch movement that way, and then do probably a 4-inch movement that way. So even though it's only like 3 inches away from this model, it's actually still 8 or a 9-inch charge to actually get to the kill rig. So that's the way it goes, guys. This is terrain. Hopefully, it was super, super useful for you. I have a few closing points I would like to mention to you. So let me just switch back to my other scene here. So let me just close out on these last few extras. I just want you to remember, guys, modifiers can stack, but your hit and your wound modifiers can never be more than 1. So if, for example, we have a weapon skill of 4, or let's go with a ballistic skill, actually. I'll change that. Let's go, yeah, let me fix that right now. If we have a ballistic skill of 4, and we are shooting a unit that is in dense terrain, whether it's a vent or trees, so it'll be -1 to hit. So now our unit that has a ballistic skill of 4 will actually be hitting on a 5, because they're -1 to hit them. Okay. Now, let's say it is -2 to hit, because your unit is shooting, they have a heavy weapon and they moved, so they're -1 to hit. And the enemy unit is also in that dense cover, so you're -2 to hit. You're still hitting on 5s, because you can never move more than 1 in either direction. But it's still important to understand this concept, because let's say they have a special ability that gives them +1 to hit, and they move with a heavy weapon. Now they're -1 and +1, so they're still hitting on 4s, the skill of 4. But, I know this is confusing, guys, just bear with me. If they have a heavy weapon and they move, they're -1, which puts them up to hitting on a 5, but they're +1, which puts them to hitting on a 4. But the target is also in the woods, they're -2 now, and even though they're +1, -2, they're still at a -1 to hit, which means they're still hitting on 5s. That might have been confusing. Just write it down a few times and you'll have it no problem. Okay. Now, these types of modifier restrictions do not stack on strength, leadership, toughness, armor saves. So if you are, let's take a Grey Knight's Paladin, okay? A Grey Knight's Paladin, and they cast a spell on them to give +1 armor. So now they have a 1-up armor save, because they're normally a 2-up armor save. They cast a spell that gives +1 to their armor. They're at a 1-up armor save. Then we put them in light cover. They then go to a 0-up armor save, because there's no restriction on the total amount of modifiers there. That only applies to your hit and wound modifiers. And this is really important when you're interacting with terrain to understand, guys. So, for example, one of the things that some people tend to do, if they're trying to shoot a target that they know is in dense terrain and they're going to be -1 to hit it anyway, maybe they'll advance and shoot them with assault weapons, because it doesn't matter if they take another -1, they can only be -1. All right, so hopefully that was really beneficial to all of you guys. Moving through terrain, navigating terrain is really, really important. It can really be a huge struggle for our bigger units. So actually, before I sign off, I'm just going to show you how it can be such a big struggle for our bigger units. I'm going to go back to my favorite model in the game, which is going to be this kill rig. Say my kill rig's right here, and I want to get him from here all the way to these guys. Sadly, he can't move through this. So what I'm actually going to have to do is I'm going to have to draw a line from here to here. And this is going to be about a 3-inch movement just to rotate him. So it takes 3 inches of his 12-inch movements. And then we're going to move him, say 7 inches, or let's go 6 inches. And then we're going to rotate him again. That took his entire movement. So moving big models can be very, very challenging. And I didn't do that exactly accurately. That was just for an example. So sometimes these buildings can really be a big pain in the butt to models, which is why I always roll kind of special rules with my guys. So a lot of times you'll see people just, they kind of have to put their big models in the open to be shot turn 1, because otherwise it's going to take them 3 turns just to get to the middle of the battlefield. So it can be a little bit of a problem. So guys, learn your terrain rules, learn how they interact with your models, practice your terrain rules, practice the keywords, because the keywords are what matters, not the way it looks. The keywords are what's important. And that is basically all I have for you today. Thank you so much for all of your attention. I love and appreciate every single one of you. If you wouldn't mind, please type any questions you have in the comment sections, any suggestions for future videos, things that I need to clarify for you. Hit the like button. Please subscribe. I will keep it coming. Until next time, happy Crumpin' Wargamers. Bye-bye.